Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are doing our final episode on Masters of the Air, covering episodes 7 to 9. Masters of the Air came out in 2024 and you can watch it on Apple TV. And we are welcoming back George this week to discuss the final episodes. Welcome back, George.
I'm still here.
So here's what you missed so far on Masters of the Air. Our sort of main characters, Buck and Bucky, and their crews are all in the POW camp, Stalag Luft III. Meanwhile, back in England, Rosenthal has had a little R&R and he's gotten back to flying more missions. And Harry Crosby, of course, is the group navigator, and he's having a tough time with the 100th losses, like most of them are.
Shall we get right into the episodes, I guess? All right, let's get into the plot. We open in 1944, in March 1944, in Stalag Luft III. So with our prisoners, everybody's called a miserable, and they're eating some cat soup because there's not much else around and it's protein. The conditions in the camp are pretty dire. The Red Cross has not been able to get any mail or packages into the camp. And basically they're all just not having a great time. So as we meet them, they're kind of listening to the radio and they're getting the latest news from the front lines. So Monte Cassino has just happened and it's failed quite a bit. And the Allies are kind of beached on Anzio in Italy, so it's not very good news. And the radio, unfortunately, gets found by the Germans on a midnight appel. So they have to build a new one and get new parts for those.
Yes, you should listen to our episode on The Great Escape because we talk about a lot of the things that the prisoners got up to. Sometimes, honestly, like they did want news from the front, of course, and that was the reason for building a radio. But a lot of the time in the POW camps, you just had to do something. Like you had to have an activity that you could devote yourself to so that you didn't just simply lay down and not get up. Because it's quite like a psychological burden to be shut away like that on an indefinite timeline and not know when you're going to be released. You can also listen to our Great Escape episode to hear more about the big escape that gets mentioned in this episode of Masters of the Air, wherein some British airmen escape from sort of the other compound of the camp. And if you recall from that episode, many of them were rounded up and 50 of them were shot. So that gets a mention in this episode as well. And of course, once that happens, as you can imagine, the relationship between the German guards and the prisoners sours even further.
Yeah. Obviously, when you watch The Great Escape, you get a whole movie about just this. But they do a nice job, I feel, in this episode to kind of show you what it would have been like scrounging part. Bucky gets to do the scrounging in this. Everybody's got a little role to play, and I quite like that they've tried to show you that in very little time. I find this episode it goes back and forth quite a lot, so obviously we're not going over all of it, but I find these episodes in particular really difficult to follow from a storytelling perspective. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I think I sometimes had a problem with the time jumping, and I think that's a problem actually I have with the entire series of Master of the Air. It's hard to get a sense of how long anything is taking and like the time skips in between. So that's what I struggle with, less so like the actual storyline in the episodes, if that makes sense. There's a sense of scale that I find difficult.
That does make sense, and to me as well. You go from like sunny England, surprisingly sunny England at this point, to like very wintry Germany. So you're like, wait, is it still winter in England? So I do get what you mean.
Yeah, I think it's probably tough if you have a couple of your main characters who are shut away in stasis effectively. Like really, they get shot down in the fall of 1943 and they get liberated in the spring of 1945. So it's like 18 months where not a lot happens. So just trying to keep those characters in play and involved in the storyline and still have somewhat interesting things happen to them is maybe a bit difficult.
Oh yeah, I absolutely feel for what they were trying to do there. In my heart of hearts, I kind of wish that they had, I think had the courage is quite a damning phrase. So something less damning than had the courage, but left Cleven and Egan out of it. for a while and really just focused on the others, because we skip over huge chunks of what, Rosie and Croz and so on get to do so that we can stay with Gail and John. And I don't know if that actually served the series as a whole.
But you did get more Austin Butler, though.
I do enjoy Austin Butler. I will admit this.
Back at Thorpe Abbott's, our base in England, the invasion of northwestern Europe is imminent, of course. This is in the few months before D-Day. And the bombing campaign has been ongoing, so they're getting a lot of replacement air crews coming in because, as we know, the casualty rates were extremely high. And a lot of them they don't have, of course, any experience yet. The veterans are quite used to seeing new guys show up and then get shot out of the sky pretty much immediately, so they don't really want to get to know them very much. But on the bright side, Bailey and Quinn, our two airmen who got shot down and escaped via the resistance, are back. And again, you can listen to our episode about the Freedom Line, and they get to go home because if you are an airman who escaped with the help of the resistance, obviously you know a ton of information that would be useful to the Germans if you were captured again, so they wouldn't want to put you in a position where you could be shot down and captured.
What just amuses me about that scene, about them returning, is them on bikes. Just general people on bikes are funny to me because I live in a country full of people who know how to bike. And when people don't bike often, it kind of shows. And it's...
Wow!
Are you criticizing their bike riding techniques?
I mean, I can't ride a bike, so maybe I should shut up.
Wow, this is just a national pride. Haterism of other people riding bikes.
I mean, the only bike I've ever been on has had 3 wheels on it, so I don't think I get to have an opinion.
Well, you expressed one. Beautiful.
I mean, fair. But it's nice to see them back, and it's nice to see how happy the ground crew is. We get to see Ken Lemon's quite happy to see them back. It's like a glimmer of hope in a very dire time, so I do like that they show them getting back, even though we don't see how they ended up getting back. I think it's nice to have a little bit of closure for them.
I do wonder if we had gotten 11 episodes, if perhaps we would have gotten to see the chunk of the plot line of them crossing the Pyrenees, for example.
Yeah, it would have been interesting for sure. After the good news, it's back to the missions. So they go on a mission to Berlin. It's March 6th, 1944, which is also known as Black Monday because it goes very badly. And 15 forts are shot down, and there are many, 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 many wounded. We see them all. It's pretty terrifying.
Yeah. And Harry Crosby is talking about how, because everything is frequently so terrible, a lot of the guys are relying on other things to get by. And so he calls up Sandra and he's like, maybe we'll just have a drink. But in his mind, he knows they're going to smash. And so, yeah, he has a full-on relationship with Sandra, who's very secretive about what she's been up to. Harry's always trying to ask her, where have you been? And she's like, wouldn't you rather know where I'm gonna be? Sort of thing. So she's
That's a fantastic line.
Yes. It's interesting because if you read Harry Crosby's memoir, he does reference this affair, and there's sort of a relationship he had with another woman where he very emphatically says that he did not sleep with her. And in the case of the woman upon which Sandra is based, he does not make any such claim. And so it seems quite evident from his book, even though he never 100% comes out and says that he did have an affair with this woman. But apparently there's a little bit of controversy about whether this is true. I think a couple of his kids think it's not true that he had the affair, but a couple of them think it is true. So I just thought it was an interesting choice to include it.
There is a moment in the book, I think he says something like, I had Jean at home and Sandra in London. And I thought, that's an interesting way of phrasing it if you're not having an affair. Sorry, Landra. Yeah. Is it Landra?
Yeah, Landra.
Yeah, the real life woman is Landra.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can definitely also understand, like, not wanting to think of your father as having an affair, so that I can understand them not wanting it to be true. I do think it happened, but who am I to say that? So...
No judgment on the kids.
Nope. So the 100 gets another leader. We get Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, played by the one and only Corin Silva, with whom we had a great interview on the show, so please check that out. He assumes command of the 100 and he becomes command pilot for the entire wing as they take on Berlin again a day later after the terrible mission that they already had, and it's the same route. He's the kind of leader that wants to show, if I'm gonna send my men into danger, I'm also gonna be in danger, kind of thing.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about Bennett as a character when we did interview Corin, and he's coming in a situation where Buck and Bucky are gone, and they imbued this real sort of devil-may-care spirit, a bit of recklessness, I think, in the 100th Bomb Group. And Colonel Harding is gone, who had a similar sort of vibe. And so Lieutenant Colonel John Bennett comes in and I guess cracks the whip a little bit metaphorically. There are some changes that he makes to the 100th that becomes a little bit stricter. But the flip side of that is that it probably does end up saving some lives.
I was reading John Bennett's book. It's called Letters from England earlier. It published, I think, in 1945. But Harry Crosby wrote a little preface to it in the 80s. And he said something really interesting. What Harry Crosby said was, "More of us survived and more of us got to go home. For that, I give a great deal of credit to one man. And it's the man who wrote the book." And so he really rated John Bennett. And in the preface, he recounts this story. And in A Wing and a Prayer, he recounts this story where quite early on in his tenure, John Bennett hauls him into his office. I think Crosby was in the shower and he gets hauled into Bennett's office. And Bennett starts sort of like looking like he's going to give him an absolute dressing down, completely chewing it out. And what he's saying is like, "How's your wife? How are you doing? How are you holding up?" And the actual conversation that they're having is quite lovely, but Bennett is acting like he is giving Crosby an absolute earful so that everybody looking at him goes, "Oh my God, this guy, he's being tough on Crosby." And Crosby's like one of the guys who's good at their jobs. I have to do better at my job. And it's an absolutely fantastic bit of theatre. And I think that really speaks to the kind of guy that Bennett was. He knew that he had to come in and like put on this big old show, but he genuinely cared.
He did. And I think there were some people who, there are always people who are going to like someone like that and someone who are going to resent something like that. I do love this Everett Blakely quote that you've put in here because I also remembered that from Crosby's memoir where he said, "I'm glad he's here," about Bennett. "Before he got here, I was the son of a bitch."
Amazing. I wish we had seen a little bit more of him in the show because you don't really get a sense of his character very much from the very few moments that he has.
No, and it's always nice to see Corin. We love Corin Silver.
We do. This is the Corin Silva fan account. Yeah, so Rosie makes it to 25 missions. And as you may recall, when they make it to 25 missions, they get to go home. But unfortunately, as they're having their big celebration for Rosie's crew making it back, the brass ups the missions for everyone else to 30 missions for new crews or 28 for existing crews who haven't yet reached 25. And Rosie, everyone's asking him if he's excited to go home, etc. But he ends up deciding to re-up, to remain and continue to fly missions. And Bennett gives him a pretty grim warning about how they're trying to get the Luftwaffe planes up into the air because they have these new P-51 Mustangs that are faster than anything the Germans have got, and that's the easiest way to take them out. But in order to get the Luftwaffe into the air, they need to send bombers as bait effectively.
Yeah, this is at the very end of the episode, and then it doesn't get a following in the next episode. I wish they'd shown the danger of it a little bit more. They're going to set it up in that conversation, which is pretty intense. And then they just forget about it. So I do wonder if that's another episode cut from those 11 episodes, if it just got lost on the editing floor, so to speak. It's such a great point, such a great warning, and then we don't get any payoff from that in the next episode.
Yeah, I love this scene. It's another scene, I think, which Nate Mann does so well. Like the scene in the flak house with the doctor. He's so still and sort of like a lot of his acting is very internal. And it's just an absolutely fantastic little masterclass in how you can do very little and give up this incredibly powerful performance because you can see everything that Rosie is thinking inside. And the way he just sort of adjusts his body, you know what's going to happen and you're waiting for it. It's the anticipation of Rosie volunteering again, that and not being fazed by anything that Bennett is telling him. It's just incredible. It's an incredibly powerful scene. And I did look up like how much of this was real, how much of this was fictional. And again, in Letters from England, Bennett said this about the scene. He said, "I asked Captain Rosenthal what kind of job he wanted in the States, as I would like to write him a letter of recommendation. Having finished his 25 missions, he was supposed to go home. He said that he would like to have a week off to go to Scotland and that on return he would be ready to start another tour of 25 missions." And it's as simple as that. And Rosie, I think, was the first person to volunteer. I think others did also do more missions after they were entitled to quit, but Rosie, I think, was the first, he says.
Re-upping is one thing, but then you have to re-up for another 25. Like, it's not like, I'm gonna do 3 more. No, I'm gonna do 25 more. Like, the odds of not surviving that are so big. It's wild.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. And I was a little disappointed that we didn't get in the show the story of why Harry Crosby didn't get to go home, which is that he was flying his last mission and he's on the plane and he's like, "Oh hell yeah, I'm going home, baby." And then they get a call over the radio and they're like, "Oh, by the way, we're promoting you to major. And if you're promoted to major or above, you have to stay for the duration." So like literally on his last flight, he's like, "Yeah, I'm going home." They're like, "No, you're not."
Brutal.
Oh, can we just close with a final note on John Bennett, which is just a really lovely thing. So John Bennett, he was in command of sort of multiple times. He's only ever meant to be the temporary commander. So he stepped down and then his replacement was killed after, I think, 11 days on one of his missions, which was the same mission that Bubbles Payne was killed. And then Bennett comes back and he comes back again later on. Years later, when he died in 93, he asked that his ashes be scattered over Thorpe Abbots. And the family said that he was expecting it to be like, essentially, they would sneak on onto the airfield and just secretly do it. But what actually ended up happening was this beautiful event with veterans, with family who turned up at Thorpe Abbots, and the runways were swept clean so that as a plane flew over, they could scatter John Bennett's ashes over Thorpe Abbots airfield. And I just think that's beautiful.
That is really lovely.
In episode 8, we start in Vermicelli, Italy, and enter the Tuskegee Airmen. We finally get our Tuskegees. And we did an episode about the Tuskegee Airmen, about the movie Red Tails, so you can listen to that episode. We're doing lots of plugging in this one. We get introduced to the Tuskegee Airmen, and we follow 3 main Tuskegee, so to speak. The first one is Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson, played by Brendan Cook. The second one is Lieutenant Richard D. Macon, played by Josiah Croz. And the third one is Lieutenant Robert H. Daniels, played by Shuti Gadwa, who I think was added just because he was Shuti Gadwa, to be honest. So those are the 3 guys that are used to tell the Tuskegee story in this show. And I think it's nice that they've been included. I would have just liked to have a separate series just about the Tuskegees. That would have been great.
Yeah, I think there's been like a lot of commentary, like they didn't get enough time. It would have been better if they had their own separate series, but I thought they haven't got their own separate series.
No.
If we didn't have this episode, we wouldn't have a Tuskegee Airmen historical episode at all. So I really like this, even though I wish there was more of it. And frankly, I would put Shuti Gatwa in anything all of the time. I think he's
very good. I like him. I thought his presence in the show was quite jarring. And part of it has got to do with his American accent, which to me still sounds quite British. So maybe that's just me. I don't know. You're British, George. Can you tell us? Is it any good?
No, I don't know. I don't think it's great.
Even when he had little short lines, it was perilous. It was like every moment I was like, "Oh, he's right on the edge there." He's going to slip into full-on British in a second.
But he's so charming. It's easy to forgive.
He's very charming. Although I have to say, Brendan Cook as Alexander Jefferson might take the cake for me. He's amazing in this.
Oh yeah, he's incredible.
For sure. And this gave me the opportunity to read Alexander Jefferson's memoir. First of all, when I bought it, I got a secondhand copy, and when I opened it, it had been signed by him. So I was very excited about that. And secondly, it's full of all of his drawings that he did while he was in the Stalag. And so we see him draw in the series. But in the book, you see he's drawn his surroundings, he's drawn his fellow POWs, he's drawn a picture of himself and called himself the Luftgangster because that's what the Germans in their propaganda reels would call Allied airmen, basically saying that they were the gangsters of the skies to try and dehumanize them and imply that they were criminals. And so he sort of took on that name with pride, and I really enjoyed it. But as always, when you're reading about the treatment of Black people in America historically, not ideal. So 992 Black men completed military pilot training at Tuskegee, and Jefferson explains in his memoir how by the time he graduated from flight school, his class of 90 was down to 25. And years later, they submitted a Freedom of Information request and found out that the reason why so many black cadets, quote unquote, washed out was because there was a quota on how many black pilots were allowed to graduate. And there is actually a quote from Jefferson's CO in Masters of the Air where he says, "You didn't wash out, Alex, so don't burn yourself out." And I do think that's a reference to this idea of a higher number of black pilots washing out than white pilots. But yeah, Tuskegee Airmen, their loss record as an escort unit was among the lowest of all American fighter groups, so they were very good at their job. And the 332nd Fighter Group, of which Alexander Jefferson was a part, is one of the most decorated fighting units of the war. They received 3 Distinguished Unit citations. They flew more than 1,800 missions, and 66 of them died in combat. And we also get a little quick glimpse in the show, very briefly, of then Colonel and commander of the Tuskegee Airmen, but later to be General Benjamin O. Davis Jr., played by Jerry McKinnon. And he was the first African-American Air Force general. He had a 35-year barrier-breaking military career. And when he passed away in 2002, several planes, including a P-51 Mustang, flew over his burial at Arlington.
That's beautiful. I think we talked about him at more length in our episode about Red Tails, so definitely go listen to that if you want to know more about him. So, Alex Jefferson expresses some disappointment about not being able to fly more meaningful missions, and this was actually, I think, true for many of the Tuskegees. They felt like they were just destroying vehicles. They were like the SAS, but in the sky. But they wanted to do actual missions. And he does get his wish because they are told they are going to France and they're going to clear the way for Operation Dragoon. So that's an amphibious landing upon different cities, one of them being Toulon.
We talked about this in our Devil's Brigade episode, Operation Dragoon.
Did I just completely forget, even though we talked about this like 5 weeks ago?
It was brief. It was one of their missions after Monte la Defensa. They took part in Operation Dragoon and they captured, I think, like 5 islands or something. 2 islands, 5 forts.
All right. Yeah, so that's another episode you can go listen to, I guess. What they have to do is they have to destroy, I think, some of the anti-aircraft defenses along the coast so the landing can happen successfully. And there's something a little bit funny about this mission because their P-51s do not have enough fuel in their tanks to make it all the way home. But like, good luck, you can make it there, but good luck getting back. Try and get to Allied land, and if not, we've given you IDs and identities, and you can try to blend in. It's like, what do you mean, blend in?
Yeah. I mean, there were black people in Europe, but probably not that many.
And certainly not with American accents.
Yeah. So during their mission, our 3 guys are shot down and captured. This is in August of 1944. Macon is badly injured. They all get interrogated by the Germans, and the Germans take care to mention, like, why are you fighting for this country that hates you? We know that you're second-class citizens at home. And Alex Jefferson mentions that in his memoir, too. He's like, oh, yeah, this German interrogator trying to imply that he personally wasn't racist against black people and trying to act like the German regime wouldn't do terrible things to racial minorities if given the chance. So definitely some interesting social commentary there. And they get brought to Stalag Luft III to join up with our other guys. So 32 Tuskegee Airmen from the 332nd Fighter Group were shot down. And actually, real-life Alex Jefferson almost had the thing happen to him. In the previous episode, we had talked about John Egan getting attacked by civilians. And so Alex Jefferson and I think Richard Macon were being taken from one railway station to another. And there was a group of Hitler youth that were like starting to surround them and was like yelling stuff at them about how they were calling them Luftgangsters and terrorist flyers and all this, I'm sure much worse language as well. And as they got onto the train, the Hitler youth were like surrounding the train and throwing things at it and were having to be held at bay by the men who were guarding the airmen. He mentions it in particular as being probably the scariest time that he had after he was shot down.
Is it worth bringing up when the Tuskegee Airmen turn up, you see different reactions from the crowd at the gates? Initially, you've got some people who are looking at them who are clearly shocked and appalled that there are black men coming into the camp. And then you've got others who recognize exactly who they are and are coming up and thanking them for being so incredible at taking care of their bombers. It's a really small moment, and it's a really important moment, I think, because I think that was an attitude from the men who actually did interact with the Red Tails. They ended up with a huge amount of respect for them. That is not to undercut all of the incredible racism that was also still very much directed towards them.
There is a scene in Red Tails, actually. It's kind of a little bit glib because there's a white pilot just being incredibly complimentary of the Red Tails and the Tuskegees in a way that's almost a little bit cringe. But I guess they did try to illustrate that it went both ways. Some people were really happy to see them, like you said.
And I do think it's quite good that when they interact with our heroes, the guys we've been following, Cleven, Brady, Murphy, and the rest, they aren't all like, hey, this is absolutely 100% something positive. Sorry, we do get to see those boys show some reticence, some disgust. Like, they're allowed to be racist, which I think is a good thing for them to be showing, that even though these are our good guys, they are still racist.
I think I put it in the notes coming up, and it says, they are not racist.
They are not racist. And the interesting one on that is Jonas Moore, I remember from the last We Happy Few tour at Thorpe Abbotts, said that that was an important moment to show, but he really wishes that Murphy wasn't one of the ones to show it, because actually, from what he knew of Murphy, he actually was one of the people who wouldn't be holding these views, because he actually had interacted with a diverse group of people throughout his life as a musician and so on. So he was like, that didn't feel right, but he did it anyway.
I just remember Matthew just ribbing on him too. You look pretty racist there, Jonas.
He did.
So, at Thorpe Abbotts, we get to follow Crosby around. He's doing all the mission planning leading up to D-Day, and he's doing it with the help of some uppers, some medication, basically. And he's been up for 72 hours total. We see him get slowly more tired and deranged. And eventually he just cranks out, he just drops to the floor, and he misses D-Day completely.
Yeah, I guess this is what happens when you give one guy 200 missions to plan, a guy who doesn't want to delegate because he doesn't trust anyone else to get it as right as he would get it.
I think the acting by Anthony Boyle in this is fantastic. It's so good. Like, I don't think anybody else could have done it this well.
There's a really sweet moment where Rosie's telling him how long he slept, and he starts like frantically pulling on his clothes, and you can just see Rosie giggling. And it's just such a sweet little light moment of, everything is terrible around them, but it's just a sweet little light moment of two friends. And in that moment, Rosie is just a boy who's laughing at his bestie. I love it.
He's been asleep for 3 days or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah. I actually quite like the decision to not show us D-Day there, because it is so much from Croz's POV that us not being able to see it gives us the same frustration of Crosby being like, I fucking missed the whole thing. I love that.
Yeah, I didn't mind it either. I thought it was, of all the things they left out, I didn't think that one was a bad choice.
Right.
We've seen D-Day in so many other films too. I mean, it's been portrayed so many times. Although, to be fair, not from the air, I don't think. We do get to see them, as Rosie tells Crosby, have a few sorties over the North Sea, and it looks beautiful. Apparently the sun is on the wrong side in the show. I don't know, but one of the CGI guys said it was. But I don't notice those kind of things. I don't care.
Yeah, but they were walking the wrong way in The Sound of Music, like back into Germany. So
perhaps a more egregious sin. So the 100th gets a new commander who is like, yeah, all those changes Bennett made, we're keeping them. Rosie gets to show off some leadership skills. Meanwhile, Crosby's desperately trying to get a hold of Sandra, but she's on a mission in France, and we get to see her do a little bit of spy shit. And eventually she, quote unquote, invites him to a hotel room, but when he gets there, there's just like a letter from her being like, we had a great time, but you should go back to your wife. Yeah, and I think in real life, they'd sent Crosby home on a month-long leave because some people, when they get stressed out, behave a little bit like assholes, and I think that's a little bit what was happening. And when he got home from his month leave with his wife, the way he tells it is that he had rediscovered his feelings for Jean, and he was no longer interested in spending time with Sandra, so he broke things off, supposedly.
I do like that they kind of give Sandra the power here to let her break it off. I think that's quite nice. I do have some feelings about her whole spy plot. I don't think it's super necessary to show that because it doesn't go anywhere.
I think that's one of the ones where if they'd gotten 11 episodes, maybe would have actually gotten like a satisfying ending on it.
Right. It doesn't really have any stakes in the current form, I don't think. But I guess they also just didn't want to make her just disappear, just off screen exit kind of thing. Even though she still gets an offstage exit right now, but you get a sense of what she's been doing that she's not been able to tell Cross about, so maybe that's why.
It's nice that we get to see her do some spying and stuff, but it would also have been really nice to have her just implied it the whole way through, and then we never actually get that closure.
Like Cross doesn't, right?
Like Croz doesn't. But yeah, but it's a tough one because I'm like, but there needs to be more women in this. There needs to be more women.
I know, and I really like Sandra as a character as well. Like, if anything, I think that they should have got rid of some other stuff and given her an actual send-off.
For sure.
In Stalag Luft III, Bucky is antsy and spiraling a foot. We kind of see him struggle with being cooped up and having no one to write to and nobody back home waiting for him. They all get word that the Allies have landed in Normandy because they've made a radio, but at this point they've engineered a radio, which is quite cool. And we skip forward 2 months and they realize that they have to start preparing because the Germans might march them out of the camp and deeper into Bavaria before the Soviets can actually liberate them. So they have to prepare for either a forced march, executions is what they're mentioning, and there's a third thing that I now can't remember, but there's 3 things that they're preparing for. And I don't know how I feel about the scenes in the camp at this point. I don't think they're super necessary. At least these aren't, like they don't really bring anything to it for me. But I guess you have to fill your episodes.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of this stuff, but we never find out what happens to Sandra, so... Yeah, and then we see the Tuskegee Airmen arrive at the Stalag. They end up in the same little cabin as Buck and Bucky and the other guys from the 100th, and Jefferson and Buck end up having a little chat, and Buck is planning on using Alex's map drawing skills for their escape plan. In Alex Jefferson's memoir, he talks about how in real life, they all came into the camp. There was a huge group of them. And then the quote unquote leader of each cabin got to choose who was going to go sleep in his cabin. And Alex Jefferson got picked first, which shocked him because he's like, there's no way this like Southern white boy is going to pick me. And then as soon as he gets into the cabin, they're all like, yeah, we chose you because we knew you couldn't be a spy. So, you know, a little bit of truth to that when it gets said in the show, when Buck says that he knows he couldn't have been a spy. It's just funny because it's like, wow, Alexander Jefferson got home from the war, and the first thing that happened when he got to the bottom of the gangplank when he was disembarking in New York was that a white officer said, whites to the left, blacks to the right, except he didn't use the word blacks. And that was when Alex Jefferson realized that he had been treated better by the Germans in captivity than he had ever been by fellow Americans. Just interesting that the Americans are so convinced that the Germans would be completely unable to recruit, you know, a black man to be a spy for them.
It's kind of shitty, isn't it, too, that the German interrogator turned out to be right. Like, oh man, that's so rough.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of soul searching that quite a few of these movies and things need to be doing. Because I've just recently been reading a book about Japanese Americans who fought in the war as well, and their treatment by the Americans. And yeah, I don't think that history is explored enough.
When Richard Macon's being interrogated by the Germans and they're talking about how shitty America is toward black people, and he's like, do you know any country that's better? And it's like, my guy, so many countries would be better. So many countries don't have institutionalized segregation.
There was an interesting one. I was reading a diary of some woman who was in Bury St. Edmunds, I think, as some excerpts, and she was appalled at the way the Americans treated their own servicemen. Their own black servicemen, even though, you know, in other areas of her diary, she was quite clearly something of a racist herself, but she could not get over how appallingly that they were treated, which I think is a really interesting commentary.
Yeah, well, Jefferson also says in his memoir that he did encounter the odd racist Italian because they were stationed in Italy, but when he would get to talking to them, he would find out that they had been told a bunch of racist shit about black people by white American servicemen.
I hate people, man. I'm just gonna end our episode 8 with the fact that I hate people. In episode 9, we open in the skies over Berlin on February 3rd, 1945, so we're well into nearly the end of the war by now. And And you guys get to take a drink because Croz says the word Masters of the Air because they were Masters of the Air.
Hey, title drop.
Even though they are Masters of the Air, like they don't really get any resistance from the Luftwaffe. Rosie's fort is shot down and hit, but he manages to make it to the Russian lines, kind of. He's in between the German and the Russian lines. So he's not picked up by Germans, but by Soviets instead. And he makes it a point to let them know that he's American by saying Coca-Cola.
When I read this in Masters, I was like, they're not going to include this because it is so ludicrous. Like, that can't be real. And they did. I was so happy. I was waiting for it because it just sounds fake, right? American.
Yeah.
Lucky Strikes, Coca-Cola.
It made me think of that scene in Saving Private Ryan where the guy's trying to put up the white flag and imply he's friendly to Americans, and he's like, Betty Boop, Mickey Mouse!
Once the Soviets help him, he's taken to Poland, and we meet him again on the road to Poznan, where they have to pause because a car up in front of the line is missing a wheel or something, and they have to stop. And they stop at an abandoned camp, and it's already abandoned, but he goes in there, and it's one of the most gut-wrenching scenes, I think, of the show, especially for Rosie. We get to see him, a Jewish person, walk in there and see all the burnt and hanged bodies. It's probably the most direct mention of the Holocaust we get, and to get it through his eyes, I think, is quite a smart choice.
At Stalag Luft III, at this point, the Russians are closing in on one side and the Americans are closing in on the other. And so the Germans are marching the airmen deeper into German territory as the Allies get closer. They are being marched miles and miles every night on dark roads. They're getting strafed by their own planes in the dark because the planes don't recognize who's on the road. So they end up getting put on a train after that. They pass through Nuremberg, which is extremely stressful for the one Jewish airman that we know about, Lieutenant David Solomon, played by Adam Silver. And they get marched to a new camp, and there Buck reunites with a friend of his named George Neathammer, played by Josh Dillon, which will become important later. When they leave that camp, they go on another march, and that night, Buck and Bucky and George and another POW make a run for it, but they get caught, and Bucky sort of sacrifices himself so that the other guys can get away.
Yeah, all the marching is once again in the episode. This is episode 9. This is a 1 hour and 20 minute long episode, and it's very disjointed, this particular one. It's very long and a lot happens. So these marches happen over a couple of scenes, and I do like that they included the marches because they were very much real, and they were in the dead of winter too, so it was very cold. So it's interesting to see, but at the same time, it's so long.
This is the episode, though, I think that has my favorite and the bitchiest John Brady moment of the entire series, which is Hambone sort of like eating food desperately before they have to go on the march, and Brady being like, they told us not to do that, it's a bad idea. And then later when he's vomiting, he's like, told you so. And to me, that just, it makes me laugh the whole time. Like, it's quite a dark episode for quite a good chunk of this, so I was really grateful for that little moment, being like, oh shit, well done.
I did like that. And I do think Brady has this sort of like brusque vibe, I think, but there's another moment earlier where like when DeMarco is vomiting up his cat soup because it grosses him out so much that they're eating cat, Brady's like, try and keep it down, it's protein. So like, even though he's kind of being an asshole, he also is doing this pilot thing where he is trying to take care of the other guys in a manner of speaking.
So we follow Buck and George and the other escaped airmen whose name I don't know for a while. And they make it out, they make it to the forest, and they see a white horse, a white bloodied horse. And I wondered, what is this horse supposed to mean? I'm sure it's supposed to have a meaning. We've seen horses in war films before, quite a lot actually. So I thought it was worth a mention. It doesn't really do anything for the plot, but I think it's meant to imply innocence or freedom or something like that.
Oh my God. What was it? It was on that shitty tank movie, Fury, where there was a white horse. And when they asked the director what symbolism was implied, the answer that he gave was such like word salad. I'm like, I don't even think you know what you meant by the white horse.
Yeah. So go listen to our episode about Fury. It's a very funny episode about a very shitty movie. So they get to the forest, and we've just met him, George, but he's killed by a literal child, which is kind of to show that at this point in the war, the Germans recruited children and elderly quite a lot in their armies because there was no one else left to fight, which is rough. And Buck gets jumped on by another kid and he has a chance to kill him and he doesn't, thank God. But they did just kill his friend and their guns weren't even loaded. So I find this scene really dark.
Yeah,
It is.
and actually, there's a scene when all the American airmen are being marched on the road, and there's this German convoy passing them going the other way, and all of the members of the convoy have these really young faces. And one of the German guards who's been guarding the Americans says something to the effect of, "They're kids. It's over." Like, he knows looking at this, he's like, oh, they're putting little kids in the army, like, it's done.
Yeah, we've seen this in other movies too, quite a lot. And it just makes me think, these kids were like 14, 15 years old. I didn't even know how to tie my shoes at 14.
Younger sometimes. In our Sunny Boy episode, they were like 12 or 13.
Crazy. Your brain isn't even close to being fully developed yet.
You say the scene was incredibly dark, and those kids looked so scared. And that moment with Gale like hovering, does he shoot the child or not? It's such a powerful moment, I think, on both sides. Because what is the kid going to do? Unlike possibly adults, he doesn't get the scale even of what he's doing. That's
No.
all he can do. And I think that you can see Buck thinking that through. I will say nice things about Austin Butler. I'm so sorry, Sam. I think Austin Butler is not given the credit he is due for the acting he does. That is, like Nate Mann, quite silent and internal. Like, Buck is a very difficult character because he doesn't do big outward expressions of emotion, but he has these internal thoughts, and the way he pauses and the way he holds himself, I think you can see the turmoil in him. I love that scene.
Yeah, again, I don't hate Austin Butler. I'm just tired of seeing him.
I know, I'm giving you a hard time. I will say something I found out today about George is that he is buried in American National Cemetery in Liège, which I know much of you were at earlier this year.
I've been there 3 times and I didn't know this. I wish I had known this and I could have gone and looked at it. Although all graves are quite impressive. Anyway, the next time we see Buck and the other prisoner, they run into American troops, so they are safe.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Bucky and the remaining airmen who haven't escaped, they arrive at their final destination, a Stalag in Moosburg, Germany. And in this camp, we see quite a lot of people of different nationalities. You get like a tiny, minuscule sense of how vast, the British Army and the French Army and all these armies that had access to colonial armies would have been. And the camp gets strafed by a P-51. You know, the Americans are flying overhead. And the Germans at this point, it's chaotic. They're opening fire on the prisoners and the prisoners fight back. And Bucky climbs up to the top of the building where the German flag is flying and he takes it down and puts up an American flag and all the Americans are very excited about it.
Yeah, we also get another surrender scene. We get to see the Germans surrender to the Americans. I don't know what the commander is that they're surrendering to because it's not quite clear from the episode, but I'm sure someone will know, so please let us know in the comments. So, meanwhile, at Thorpe Evans, Croz is still there, and people are still flying, so he has to lay down the law with the guy who forgot to open up the equipment hatch, which means that people don't get any parachutes. So he gets really mad and he slams his face into his breakfast, which I quite like.
Yes. See also why he was sent on leave, because he was kind of acting like a dick because he was very stressed out at this point in the war. Rosie makes it back home from his adventure being shot down and being picked up by the Russians. He and Croz have a deep conversation. I feel like one of the few times where they actually sort of get anywhere near touching on this topic, but there's this Nietzsche quote, "Whoever fights monsters should take care not to become a monster himself, because if you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you."
This is one of my favorite scenes. Like, emotionally, this is really well acted by both of them. Croz is the one doubting who he has become and what if he goes home and it's not the same and he's a different man and he feels really bad, and Rosie gets to talk him out of it. And I quite like that they've included this. Buck also makes it back to Thorpe, like everybody gets back home, yay. Where the US Air Force is hoping for a flak truce, which means they are hoping that the Germans won't shoot flak at them. So they can drop food over a very starving Holland, or the Netherlands if you will. And what follows is Operation Chowhound. Rosie, Buck and Croz and even Kenny Lemons get to fly and drop food over My Little Country. And the RAF also had a version of this mission called Operation Mana. And on the way back, we hear Bucky on the radio. So Bucky's back home too. Yay. George, do you want to say anything about Ken Lemons flying a plane?
I liked the scene. I feel like, if I recall correctly, it's not quite true that Ken Lemons particularly had never flown before, but it's a fantastic scene, and it's always nice to see Raph Law. Just in general, I think, to be honest, it's a very funny scene. It's a very sweet scene as well, to have like everybody back together. So it's like representatives of different groups. So you've got Ken from the ground crew, you've got Dougie is there. So, Cleven and Rosie, like it's like everybody's coming together again. And Croz
gets to drop a little orange over the Netherlands. He's very happy to be dropping some oranges.
If I recall correctly from reading some accounts, particularly at Thorpe Abbott's and other places that we were visiting, a lot of the guys found a lot of catharsis in being able to go on such a wholesome mission of like humanitarian aid after having spent so much of their time bombing. And so I think it was really important to include the scene, not because it's hey, look how great the Americans are, but look how healing this is for these men. And that's the other reason why I think it's fantastic that Ken Lemons is there, is that he gets to be part of that.
Yeah. I put a tiny little note about Operation Chowhound. On the American side, 10 bomber groups of the U.S. 3rd Air Division flew 2,268 sorties beginning May 1st and delivering a total of 4,000 tons of food, 400 B-17s, and they dropped 800 tons of K-rations during the 1st to the 3rd of May, and the drop zone for that is Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. And you could actually see in the show, you see in one of the fields, it says, "Many thanks, Yanks." And there's actually a photo of that happening in real life, so that's not made up. It sounds really made up, but it's real.
Yeah, and then the war is over, and everyone's sort of packing up to go home. And I really liked the bit where they showed the planes flying away, and like all the little kids that had been hero worshiping the airmen the whole war are watching the planes fly away for the last time. And the locals, they've all turned out to say goodbye to their American airmen. And then they're watching the planes fly away, and they're turning around to walk back to their homes. And there is like something a little bit, I don't know, sort of nostalgic, and I liked the way that they presented that, I guess I'll say.
On that note, other little kids, we mentioned last episode in the recording about a kid who was at one of the airfields who interacted with a lot of the Americans, called Clifford Hall. I don't know if we named him, but actually I think it was a few days after we recorded that episode, we found out that Cliff had passed away at the age of 93. So I just wanted one to mention that, and two to say that he does have a book called The Memories of Rougham Airfield, which is really worth reading if you can get a hold of it. I don't think there are that many copies in circulation, but I'm hoping that they will reprint, because it's a really wonderful look at the point of view of a child interacting with these airmen.
Yes, he died the day after we recorded. It felt quite strange, but he was really generous in sharing his memories with us. To me, these people, these kids have been on these airfields for 2-3 years, and their lives were completely, all they had were those airfields at those times. So it must be really strange to have them all leave. And I'm guessing many of them didn't see them again for a very long time, if at all. So can't even imagine what that's like. So at the very end of the show, we get a whole lot of end cards. They are very long, but it's quite nice to see where everybody ended up, even though some of them are kind of incomplete, I want to say.
So Harry Crosby left the Air Force in 1945 as a lieutenant colonel and returned to Jean and their son Steve. He received a PhD in literature from Stanford University in 1953. After teaching at the University of Iowa for several years, he and Jean moved to Massachusetts with their 4 children. Crosby taught at Boston and Harvard universities for more than 30 years. Harry and Jean served as co-presidents of the PTA at every school their children attended. Harry Crosby's memoir about his experiences during World War II was published in 1993, which we have referenced pretty extensively throughout these episodes. Harry was 91 when he passed away in 2010. And one thing I do kind of wish that they had included was that during the Vietnam War, Professor Harry Crosby was very anti-war, and he was known for investing his time in anti-war causes.
It's very telling of what war does to you as a person, and I agree. It would have been nice for them to have included that.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little critical end note on the war, too.
Well, yeah, and especially, he was teaching kids who were going off to Vietnam, right? You were part of one generation that went to war, and now you're seeing it from the perspective that your parents saw it from, that all these 19, 20-year-old kids are being sent away to be slaughtered in the jungle. Alexander Jefferson remained on active duty with the Air Force until December 1947 when he joined the Air Force Reserve. The same year, he moved back to Detroit with his wife, Adela, and became a science teacher. He taught in the Detroit public school system for over 30 years. Jefferson retired from the Air Force Reserve as a lieutenant colonel. He was a founding member of both the Detroit and national chapters of the Tuskegee Airmen. Alexander Jefferson passed away in June 2022. He was 100 years old.
That's very old. They make a point in the show where they express annoyance that none of them have been promoted up from lieutenant. At this point, they should have been majors and all that sort of stuff. And I'm glad he got to retire as a lieutenant colonel, but it would have been nice if they'd been given that rank during the war, or at least a higher rank than they had.
Richard Macon was promoted to captain following his liberation from Mooseburg. He left the Air Force in December 1945. Macon established a flight school when he returned to Birmingham, Alabama. And there's actually a super interesting story because Howard Hughes, the eccentric multimillionaire, owned all of the airport there. And so Macon had a personal meeting with Howard Hughes to ask him if he could run his flight school out of part of the airport. And Howard Hughes said yes. And so Macon made this comment about how Black people were not allowed to fly from the airport. But in his little section of it, he was allowed to run his flight school. So I thought that was super interesting. And after earning a master's degree in mathematics at Indiana University, he returned to Alabama to work at Miles College. In 1955, Macon joined his friend Alexander Jefferson in Detroit and began his career as a public school teacher. Richard Macon and Alexander Jefferson remained friends until Macon died in 2007 at the age of 86. Captain retired Richard Macon is buried in Arlington National Cemetery.
That's a cool story. The Hughes story. I would never... Is that in a memoir?
No, I just read it online somewhere.
Ah, it's neat.
Robert Rosie Rosenthal was training to pilot B-29s in the Pacific when the Japanese surrendered in August of 1945. After the war, Rosie helped prosecute Nazi war criminals at the Nuremberg trials. He interrogated leading figures in the German military high command, including Field Marshal Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe. On his way to Nuremberg, Rosie met Phyllis Heller, a fellow prosecutor. They were married less than 2 weeks later. They had 3 children. For his service, Robert Rosenthal was awarded 2 Silver Stars, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 2 Purple Hearts, a British Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Croix de Garde from France. The 52 missions he flew during the war were the most flown by any member of the 100th Bomb Group. Rosie died in 2007. He was 89 years old.
Here's a quick fun fact about Phyllis. When she and Rosie got together and they were thinking about getting married, she said, okay, but you have to ask my father. And Rosie's like, oh, she's traditional, that's nice. So they did, and her father's like, no, absolutely not. You're too young and you haven't thought this through. And Rosie's like, oh God, that's it. And Phyllis was like, well, no, we asked him. Let's go. Let's get married. I love that.
Oh, I love Phyllis.
Reminds me a little bit of Vila Taba, who also got married after 4 weeks of knowing her husband.
And who also asked her dad, and he was not enamored of the idea.
And there's a good little note from you, George. The fact that Rosie's grandson, Sam Rosenthal, has a small cameo in Mota as well. He plays Arthur L. Jacobson, and I think he's a tail gunner or something in the show, which is quite nice. You get to see his face.
Well, back to our novel-length end cards. Gail Buck Clevin remained in the Air Force and served in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. He retired a full colonel. Clevin earned both an MBA from Harvard and a PhD from Georgetown University. Buck married Marjorie Spencer within a month of returning to the United States after the war. John Egan was his best man. Marge died unexpectedly in 1953. She had been married to Gail for 8 years. Her photograph was still on his mantle 53 years later when he passed away at the age of 87.
I am going to jump in here and say that if I was Gail Cleven's second wife, who he was with for 50 years, I would be really upset that I was not mentioned in this card. So Esther Lee Athay, that was his second wife. They were married for half a century, and Master of the Air did not think that was an important fact to put in at all, because in favor of this sweetheart storyline, which is lovely, but kind of rude.
I
Yeah.
don't understand. It's one line and you've already written a novel. Just put it in there.
Just put it in there.
Right. And I think that it can have a more, like, I don't know. It's one of the resistance fighters we talked about. And in the movie, his wife dies, and they make it a whole thing where it's like, oh, well, he wrote this beautiful poem about her, and like she was the love of his life and whatever. And in real life, he actually remarried and then wrote a bunch of beautiful poetry about having a second chance at love and opening his heart up again and whatever. And I do think that they could have had this hopeful note here of being like the love of his life died, but then he met someone new who also, they had a lovely, happy, extraordinary long marriage together.
Yeah.
And John Bucky Egan, last but not least, he stayed in the Air Force after the war. One evening after returning to Manitowoc, he ran into a high school acquaintance, Josephine Pitts, who was also still in uniform as a WASP, a Women Air Force Service pilot. They were married a few months later. Colonel Egan flew combat missions during the Korean War. He eventually became director of Air Force operations for the entire Pacific area. He was working at the Pentagon when he died of a heart attack in 1961. He was 45 years old. Josephine passed away in 2006. They are buried together at Arlington National Cemetery.
Meh. It just makes me so sad when these guys end up dying quite young after living through the war. I mean, it can happen to anybody, I guess, getting a heart attack, but it just feels extra sad after you've been through such an ordeal. I guess we finally made it to the end of these end cards that last forever, but we do still have to rate the entire series, guys. Okay, so let's rate the show however many buck naked mirror monologues out of 10. I'll start. I'm gonna rate it 8 buck naked mirror monologues out of 10. I quite enjoyed the show. I think if I had to rate it the first time I watched it, I wouldn't have rated it quite so high. Right now, I quite enjoy it, so I'm giving it an 8. I think they did a great job with the episodes that they got. I'm happy they included loads of stuff, so it's good. The music's great, the acting's good, I'm happy. How about you, George?
I mean, yeah, I really enjoy it. I think I will rate it a 7 Buck Naked Mirror monologues out of 10. I appreciate that they were under a great deal of constraints. They were filming it at an incredibly difficult time. I just feel like some of the choices of what to cut and where to cut it was clumsy to me. And it almost heightened the fact, like, here's a big sign pointing to the fact that there is missing material here. Whereas I think that could have been more streamlined and it wouldn't have felt so glaring. But I do like it. And the acting, as you say, is phenomenal. Visually, it's absolutely stunning.
I will give it 6.5 buck naked mirror monologues out of 10. I think that in the 25 years since Band of Brothers was made, Hanks and Spielberg really had an opportunity to make a World War II show that's perhaps a bit more nuanced and less rah-rah America, and does delve a little bit more into the morality of the quote-unquote strategic bombing that they were doing, which quite a number of the guys, including Harry Crosby, reference later after the war as something that they did wrestle with. And, I thought that to have the Tuskegee Airmen talk about how great America was, like, that kind of clanked for me, that Little Richard Macon.
Oh, yeah.
There are a few parts like that where I really thought that they could have actually made something that was nuanced and did touch on those themes, and they totally missed the opportunity. And they just kind of went back and did a retread of the sort of themes that they have talked about before. And I think that, like you said, George, there are a lot of kind of false starts in this where things were promising and then they just didn't get the chance to wrap it up maybe the way that they could have or should have. And I'm also sympathetic to the idea that COVID happened and they didn't get their 11 episodes and they only got 9 and they had to, make do. But yeah, there are so many bits and pieces of this where I'm like, it would have been nice to see more of this or more of that. I do think the acting is quite good. I don't think there's anyone who clanks in the ensemble. And I have come around on the theme song, though initially I was a bit of a hater towards it. And I do think that the combat scenes are as good as they can be for the fact that really you have to do CGI. Like, at this point, you're not going to wrestle up 100 B-17 bombers from anywhere to fly at this point. So yeah, I have seen it a couple of times, and I usually find something every time in my watching experience where I'm like, oh, that is kind of fun, actually. But I think it's not my favorite of the 3 HBO war offerings, we'll say.
I think I rated the other two like 9s and 10s, so I think I'm I'm also of the same mind that it's not my fave, but I still really enjoy it. So
Did we not talk about this in one of the other episodes that I think we all rate the Pacific? Or is it Margie, you don't rate the Pacific as the highest one? I know that I do, if I had to pick one.
I think we haven't explicitly said, but I think it's true for all of us that we all prefer the Pacific. This one could have been so much better if they had been a little bit more progressive with it and taken a couple of more risks, I think.
I think one of the risks is actually, as I sort of mentioned before, if they had switched wholeheartedly from the Buck Cleven, John Egan storyline into sort of the Harry Crosby, Rosie Rosenthal one, we might have had some time for a more interesting, nuanced discussion of the way that attitudes changed, the way that how they were doing things changed, and that would have been a nice space for me, I think.
Yeah.
I do think perhaps too that unfortunately by the time this show was made, the veterans are gone.
Yeah.
At this point we're 80 years after the end of World War II. Sometimes you can tell these people that are gone now that we can't talk to. I think that there's sometimes this idea of wanting to present them as war heroes, perhaps in a way that they maybe didn't necessarily even see themselves, and the nostalgia for World War II and for this lost generation and for our dads and grandfathers that we did venerate and love and care for very much and we did perceive as these war heroes. And the fact that the guys are gone and can't speak for themselves, you experience that loss in Masters of the Air.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh, what are we reading? George, you want to go first?
Oh my God, I actually am not reading anything specific at this moment because I finished everything that I was reading. I have just picked up a book. It arrived at my doorstep today, which is an account of a fellow who moved through the SAS and the SBS, the Special Boat Service, and it's just a memoir for his time in the war that I'm really looking forward to getting into because he is not one of the ones who is mentioned in SAS Rogue Heroes, as many of them weren't. They focus on a very small group of men. So it's very nice to actually read about the experiences of people who are not now getting the accolades and the... I saw a newspaper article about a guy who wants Bill Fraser from the SAS to get a plaque in Leamington Spa. And I'm like, that's very nice. And that's wonderful for that. He should absolutely do that. But presumably it's because this guy has figured out who he is via the show. There are a lot of guys who will not have that recognition.
Here, here. Can I just say, perfectly on brand for you, once again.
I'm always on brand.
How about you, Sam? What have you been reading?
Well, I read a few things while I was on holidays, but right now I've just started Their Finest Hour and a Half by Lissa Evans, and that might be a clue as to what we might cover in a few weeks on this podcast.
I might not be doing any reading at all if all of my time is taken up with a new kitten.
New kitten!
You can read to the kitten.
I can read to the kitten.
All right. Well, thank you, first of all, George, for joining us for yet another episode of Rosie. It's been a real blast having you on for 3 in a row. Thanks for that.
Thanks for having me. I love coming on Rosie, and it's actually nice, despite the fact that I only apparently read about the SAS. It's quite nice to come and talk about something that isn't related to the SAS.
So, I think with that said, I'm gonna close out this episode. Thank you very much for listening. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast, like Spotify or Apple or somewhere else. You can rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode and the other 2 episodes related to this to a friend who likes Masters of the Air. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosiethereviewer.com. See you next week.
Bye.